Hey, welcome everybody. This is Draft Outlook. I am your host, Joseph Potter, and we have an exciting show for you guys today. Joining me is the Kerm, Andrew Kermish, and Draft Utopia's own Chris Ransom. And we look at 5 teams. We got a large show, 5 teams, plus as we start out here today, Chris and I are going to go over our weekly rookie reports. And as always, Chris has 2 players. I've got 2 players, both quarterbacks. I think you guys know who's coming from both of us. We're just going to update on these. And I'm going to start out. I'll look at my man, Nate Peterman.
You mean Peterman, yeah.
Yeah, why do I always call him Peterson? Hey, Peterman. He is – Tyrod Taylor got knocked out of the game last week for the Bills with a concussion. He is under NFL's concussion protocol. Peterman stepped in with the starters, played until 4 minutes to go in the second quarter. Peterman showed up. He made some great throws. He made all the throws that were asked of him. He stood in the pocket, and Peterman was rushed. He was under a lot of pressure by the Ravens defense. The Ravens held nothing back. And Peterman showed that he belongs because he just went for it. Now, if you look at stats, the stats really don't tell the whole they don't tell the whole story. But what you can say is that what he did was absolutely astounding. And the fact that he stood in there against a heavy rush and he delivered. Now, in the game against Baltimore, he was 11 for 23, only 47%. As I said, doesn't tell the whole story. He was sacked once. Yeah, he fumbled once, no touchdowns, no interceptions, had 93 yards, made some good throws. That's the thing. That is a similarity between he and Deshaun Kaiser. They stand in the pocket, and Kaiser against the Bucs, he had a wicked game. I was listening to it over the radio, watched it later. And Jim Donovan seemed to be surprised that, at least sounded surprised that, hey, 40 minutes before the game in Tampa, there's a torrential downpour. You're in Tampa Bay, Tampa, Florida. It's like in Florida, we get rain. It's almost like clockwork a lot of days. You know? So, I mean, this should not surprise anybody. Donovan's been traveling to Tampa for years. He should know this. The Bucs defense was tough. As always, they had pressure coming in. Kaiser made some great throws, made some running throws. He and Corey Coleman look like a duo that could be dynamic as they grow together. The final stats, once again, were not good. But it was raining throughout, which could have affected. Kaiser did make some mistakes. Of course, you're going to have to learn as you go because, let's face it, Kaiser right now was named, as of yesterday, the Browns' starting quarterback for the season. And Hugh Jackson said, this is for the long haul. We're going to give him time to grow into it. this is it. I mean, Kaiser is the man. He's handled himself well. He's made mistakes. He's going to continue to make mistakes. He's the youngest quarterback in the NFL. He's 21 years old, doesn't turn 22 till January. I mean, it's not even close. As one former receiver said, the thing that you knew you had something in this guy when his first play in the first preseason game, his first series, Jackson put him out there and said, "Rookie, we want to see what you can do. You're going no huddle on the first series." That's when you know there's something there. Unfortunately, 21 years old, in the rain, 6 for 18, 93 yards, 1 interception. You know, he handled himself well, didn't make the plays he needed to. So he's got a ways to go yet, but he's shown a lot of promise. Nate Peterman shown a lot of promise, and I'm really looking forward to seeing both of these two guys play more. Kaiser will be playing a lot earlier than Peterman, but I think in the end, both of these guys are going to have long, successful careers if they continue the way they're doing now.
Interesting stuff, Joey. And instead of talking about Watson like I have the two last week, I know the week before that I talked about Mahomes and one other quarterback. I think I talked about a few, including Davis Webb and Josh Dobbs. So I'm going to talk about Mahomes because he is going to make his first career start in the final preseason game against the Tennessee Titans. So Mahomes and Kareem Hunt's been named the starting running back for the Chiefs with the Spencer Ware injury. So Hunt's going to start right away, and Mahomes is going to start a preseason game against the Titans to wrap up the preseason. So he had his worst game of the preseason, but it wasn't an overly terrible game. So Patrick Mahomes is one of those players that really is being put in a situation to be groomed for the future. And the other quarterback I was going to touch on really quickly is Brad Kaya. Brad Kaya is actually on the brink of getting cut from the Lions because Jake Rudock, the backup they drafted out of Michigan in the 2016 draft, the year before they took Kaya, he has really impressed in the preseason to the point where the Lions turned down a 4th-round pick for the rights to Jake Rudock. That's how impressive he's been, which kind of surprises me because I don't think Rudock is worth anything more than a 4th-round pick.
Yeah, and I mean, most backup quarterbacks are not worth more than a 4th-round pick. So if they're wanting more for him, then he must have done some amazing stuff in training camp.
Yeah, he's not worth a round pick, and if that were me in that situation, I'd pull the trigger and take the 4th-round pick because I had a undrafted grade on Rudock, yet he went in the 6th round, and it's interesting because now teams are offering up to 4th-round picks to get him because they have Kaya as well, and the Lions are in a very good quarterback situation.
Yeah, it's Travis Rudolph. Jake Rudolph.
No, Jake Rudock, not Trav. You're thinking of Travis Rudolph.
Oh, I thought you said Rudolph.
I did for a second. It's Jake Rudock.
Okay.
That's on both of us, but yeah, Jake Rudock is a guy getting a lot of offers. Teams are offering the Lions. They're trying to trade for him. So with Rudock and Brad Kaya, Kaya could be the odd man out if the Lions can only put 2 QBs on that 53-man roster. Kaya might be the odd man out. Would he get demoted? Would somebody else pick Kaya up? Would Kaya go to practice squad? That remains a mystery. But Brad Kaya is in that situation where he may be, even though he's showing improvement and he struggled in training camp, he's also on the brink of being cut from that 53-man roster because the odds of all 3 QBs making the roster, I'm not sure if it's going to happen because Rudock is getting better, but Kaya is getting better as well. So this is an interesting dilemma the Lions have.
It is, but something I say, good backup competition is excellent. I mean, you want to have your backups ready to go in, and if they're fighting tooth and nail for that job, then they're getting better. And so it's a good it's a good dilemma to have. I'm reading here something. Yeah, I'm reading on Tyrod Taylor's concussion. And the TJ Yates is also injured. Tyrod Taylor's injured. So they're both in concussion protocol. Nate Peterman said that Buffalo's quarterback room right now is like a ghost town because Peterman is the only one there. So if neither one of those guys are ready for week one, if neither have been cleared from the concussion protocol, we're going to be seeing Nathan Peterman in week one as Buffalo starter.
Against Josh McCown and the Jets.
Yes. And so, I said we might not see Peterman until later on. Heck, Taylor went down with a concussion. Yates went down with a concussion. Well, guess what? Here comes Peterman. So, if during the first week of the season I got to see Kaiser and Peterman, I'm fine with it. I would love to see it. Love to see what these guys do.
Yep, same here. Kaiser could be a huge asset. Nate Peterman might end up starting for Buffalo week one, so it's going to be interesting to see what those guys can do. And
you did have something you wanted to say here, and with your second guy, and that would be Chiefs rookie running back Hunt.
He's expected to start with Spencer Ware on injured reserve. He's going to start week one. That's what I've heard.
Oh, I thought you were going to give us an update on his progress, not that
everybody got hurt. A lot of progress, and he's capable of having big games on the ground. So Kareem Hunt is a player that should start week one, and the key to beating the Patriots is for Kareem Hunt. He's going to be the X factor because he's ascending into that starting role. And looking through his preseason updates here, and he's going to have a lot of carries. I thought he'd only have like 100 to 120, but he's going to have around 220 carries.
And has said that he's up for the challenge. He's looking forward to it, and that he has faith in Andy Reid, and Andy Reid has faith in him. So, and Hunt is like, he can be a little bit of bowling ball if he wants to. It's like, I'm watching some highlights of him here against the Bengals. He's running through arm tackles, running over people. He's hitting the holes hard and showing speed, getting to the second level. Threw a stiff arm there against the defensive back. So Hunt actually looks like he could potentially be the man there in Kansas City. And if you have Hunt going in there, you have a couple of these other rookies that the Chiefs ended up with. I mean, their future looks pretty good, especially if Andy Reid stays on as coach.
He got a 5-year extension, so I think he'd be back for at least 3 years at the bare minimum.
Yeah, that's what I would think. But at the same time, Reid's getting old, and Reid's not quite as big as he was, because after that situation with the crane having to pick him up, when he sprained his ankle or his knee or whatever it was a few years ago, he did go on a huge diet. But, you got to go age, health. I mean, you got to look at those areas. So Reid's getting up there. So I'm hoping that he sticks around for a while because I love him as a coach. And I think with the guys he's got, I think that the sky's the limit for these youngsters under Reed.
Andy Reid is 59 years old. So he was born in 1958. So when he came to the Eagles, he was only 41 at the time. So
Yeah,
which was pretty
he
young
seems
for a
like
head coach back then. But now it's like,
yeah. I mean, he seems like he's been around for, whew, he's
years
been
though.
around a long time. Yeah, because I know he was an assistant in Green
Green Bay,
Bay.
when he worked with Mariucci and Gruden on
Yeah,
Holmgren's staff. So he has experience.
yeah, in San Francisco. I mean, he's been around. I mean, I thought he was older than he is simply because of how long he's been around. But
He's only 59, so he might coach for another 5 to 10 years too.
yeah, so he might be around. But moving on, here's where we get to the fun part, folks. We get the Denver Broncos. Denver last year finished, I think they won their division. Right now, they're second in the AFC in the preseason at 3-0. Somehow won the quarterback.
Denver went 9-7 and finished third in the AFC West last year, behind Kansas City.
Okay. Oh yeah, Kansas City's. Yeah. Oh well. But Denver with Trevor Siemian there, he's only going to take them so far. But their draft was a very good draft. They got a guy I liked in DeMarcus Walker, another guy I like that's going to help out quite a bit on that offensive line at first round. Garrett Bowles at the offensive tackle position. Guy you liked in Carlos Henderson. Tight end that I think we both liked in Jake Butts. And then they got a developmental quarterback in Chad Kelly in round 7. So, Chris, what do you think about the draft and how Denver did in the draft?
Well, I pulled up my Denver Broncos season preview on Draft Utopia. I pulled up. They made a huge splash for Ronald Leary at left guard. They also got Pico from the Bengals to be their nose tackle to replace Sylvester Williams. But the player they took in the first round that's going to have an immediate impact is Garrett Bowles. And my one concern with Garrett Bowles on tape was that he needed to develop more strength. Not only has Bowles developed more strength, he's developed this attitude that is just infectious. And this is what I mean. He's basically telling opposing defenders in practice that the quarterback is like my wife, and if you lay your hands on her, I'm going to knock your ass on the ground. He's bringing that assertiveness, that toughness, that leadership you didn't think he had, and he's corrected his strength. So not only has he corrected his issues with his strength and gotten stronger, which was something he struggled against versus Washington, he's actually brought more assertiveness to the table as well, which is a huge bonus because you didn't expect this kind of leadership from Bowles right out of the gate. So he had the best footwork in the draft, but there were questions with his strength, and he's corrected that. Plus, he's brought a new element of leadership. DeMarcus Walker's probably going to start next to Von Miller because Shane Ray is expected to miss the first 2 weeks of the regular season. They got Brendan Langley out of Lamar. That was one pick you didn't mention. He's a small school corner out of Lamar who I really liked, as well as Carlos Henderson, who is competing for that slot receiver job. Jake Butt is a third-string tight end on this roster, but many believe he has the potential to be the number 1 or number 2 tight end. I like him as a number 2 tight end in this situation, but overall, Denver's draft looks like it could be one of the better drafts, even though I thought it was one of the worst drafts initially because I wasn't a fan of the Bulls pick. But they capitalized on day 2 and day 3. They got Chad Kelly as this year's Mr. Irrelevant. So this is looking like another strong draft on Denver's end.
Yeah, and what you said, that is the exact attitude that people want from their offensive line. And It is simply put, you touch my quarterback, I'm going to knock you on your ass. That's the attitude. Are going to regret ever touching my quarterback. And if you hit my quarterback after the snap, I'm going to hit you. That's the attitude. You don't touch my quarterback or else you're going to get hit. Kerm, what do you think about this draft class and how it's going to help Denver?
They still gonna have to wait and see. I say maybe only one or two will really help them all that much. I don't think they're doing all that great.
So it's basically Bowles, and who else do you think will probably end up helping them out of that group?
I gotta look up who all they drafted because I don't have that.
DeMarcus Walker, defensive end. Carlos Henderson, wide receiver. Brendan Langley, cornerback. Jake Butts, tight end. Isaiah McKenzie, wide receiver. D'Angelo Henderson, running back. And Chad Kelly, quarterback.
I'm going to agree with Kelly being a long-term solution to help, but it's going to be a couple of years down the road. And I say their defensive end will probably help them the most.
Yeah, DeMarcus Walker was a guy I really liked coming out as well. Florida State, he was at one time seen as the best.
Yeah, I remember at this point last year on our podcast, we were talking about how DeMarcus Walker may arguably be the best defensive end in this draft after Myles Garrett.
Yeah, and I don't see that changing as much. I think he can make just as much of an impact there. 33-inch arms, 280 pounds, big hands to latch on. 6'4". One of the best defensive line prospects in the country. He inconsistency made him fall, but it's like Kerm said, right now he and Bowles may be the only two guys that really helped this year, but they got some guys from that in the future years that are going to help. And I don't know about Chad Kelly. I was never a huge fan of his, but where he's sitting now, he's got 1 to 2 years at least that he's going to be able to just sit and learn. And there have been comparisons that he may end up being, something like a Jay Cutler type player. At the same time, he did have some, other than just size, he had a few off the field concerns. I don't really think they were problems, but just rumors about his attitude a little bit, which made him fall.
Rumors. These coaches in Denver are going to have their hands full with the quarterbacks. Mike McCoy left the Chargers to become Denver's offensive coordinator. Well, the Chargers fired McCoy, but the point is Denver got him as an offensive coordinator. Former Raiders offensive coordinator Bill Musgrave, who Oakland fired. They fired Musgrave, so he's coming to Denver as a quarterbacks coach where he won't call plays on offense, but he'll work with the quarterbacks, develop them. That might end up being a good hire because Musgrave was a terrible coordinator in my opinion. So if he can't fix it with the quarterbacks in this situation. He might not get another NFL gig. And the other hire on offense is the offensive assistant / assistant quarterbacks coach is Clint Kubiak. And yes, that is Gary Kubiak's oldest son, Joey. So Clint Kubiak is getting promoted from just an offensive assistant to an offensive assistant.
Well,
he's going to be the quarterback coach and the offensive coordinator.
Well, we'll see what he can do with it. I mean, let's not discount the guy before he makes play. Now, moving on from that, and I know we haven't talked about the Broncos defense much. What do
When
you
this
guys?
defense is healthy, though, it's the best. This team has a chance to be the best team in the division when the defense is healthy and in their zone. They lost Wade Phillips, which was a huge loss as well.
Yeah, and losing Wade Phillips is probably the biggest loss because Wade Phillips is one of the best defensive coordinators in the last 20 years. I mean, say what you will about his coaching resume.
The Rams defense in fantasy football, but let's stick with the Broncos here. Losing Wade Phillips means they might not blitz as much, but they brought in Vance Joseph, who is great with coverage schemes. So you'll probably see more lockdown defense. Denver's had the #1 pass defense in the NFL each of the last 2 years. That shouldn't change with Vance Joseph. But you've got Joe Woods, the defensive backs coach in Denver, getting promoted to defensive coordinator, and they brought in Marcus Robertson as the new defensive backs coach. So they're going to put a huge emphasis on their defensive backs, like their head coach, their defensive coordinator, the new defensive backs coach. They're all huge with developing defensive backs. So the front seven, especially Von Miller, these players are going to have to step up to make things easier for the coaches on the front seven, because Reggie Herring is going to have to pick up where Wade Phillips left off as far as developing the linebackers. And then you got Bill Kolar coming back as a defensive line coach in his 3rd year. So these front seven guys are really going to have to pick things up to make things easier for the front seven coaches.
Yeah, and I mean, I have a feeling they can do it, but at the same time, we're going to have to wait and see there. As you said, a lot of potential to be one of the best teams in the league if they can keep their defense in line. Now, moving on, we have the Detroit Lions, a team that I have been high on for all year. I was high on them last year. Loved them then. Really like them now. And here's the thing. With the Lions, probably when Megatron retired, we thought that the Lions were done. Right? And quite frankly, the exact opposite happened. It was like the best thing to ever happen to Matt Stafford's career, because now he didn't feel that obligation to get the ball to Megatron, and he started spreading the ball all over the field, and he had a career year. Now, you put it in there this year, I think he's going to have an even bigger year. And this time, he's going to have a little bit of help. Middle linebacker was a huge issue last year. They got a favorite of mine in the draft, middle linebacker Gerard Davis out of Florida. Then they turned around in round 2 and took a guy with an attitude problem, but at the same time, a big play magnet. He's going to give up some plays, but he's going to take them away as well. They get Tease Tabor back in Florida. And then a guy who people are saying may end up starting in round 3. Lo and behold, they get Northern Illinois Mid-American Conference wide receiver, 6'4", 218-pound, 32-inch long arms, freak of nature. They get
Kenny Golladay.
Galladay, thank you. For some reason, I was wanting to call him Galladay. But
yeah, Kenny Golladay, I already locked him into one of my fantasy leagues. That's how high I am on him, because just dominated versus the Colts in that preseason opener. 4 receptions, 2 receiving touchdowns. And I think Davis and Golladay are the 2 guys that are going to have the biggest impact. Tabor's listed as a dime cornerback on Detroit's depth chart, so he's probably going to be only used in 4 cornerback sets. Otherwise, they'll have him sit. They'll have him learn the playbook. They'll condition him to improve his speed, improve how fast he reacts to things. They'll have him try to learn all that this year and then play him in the future. But Tahir Whitehead had over 100 tackles at middle linebacker last year, but he's moving to the weak side because they got Gerard Davis. So
Yeah,
And that outside linebacker was a huge issue for the Lions as well. But they can move Whitehead to the weak side. That stabilizes some things with Davis starting in the middle.
Yeah, and they even went a step further by solidifying the backup middle linebacker situation, and in round 4 getting the ultra speedy, athletic Jalen Reeves-Maben out of Tennessee. And he can play all 3 linebacker positions. So now you've got huge depth, and help for your special teams. So the Lions defense, especially that linebacking core, that wide receiver core, these guys look a lot more dangerous after this draft.
With only 4 teams in the NFL, Detroit, Pittsburgh, so the Cowboys, the Giants, the Steelers, and the Lions are the only 4 teams in the NFL with all of their coaches from last year returning. And if you count the teams that only lost their tight ends coaches but everyone else back, that adds up to New England and Tampa Bay. That's 6 total teams that have every coach except their tight ends coach back. So Detroit's one of the 4 teams that has all of their coaches back, whether it's head coach, coordinators, position coaches. So I think that's huge in a sense. But at the same time, it could backfire if the Lions do not match or meet that playoff expectation they had last year.
Yeah, and I also want to bring up another depth player that they drafted, a guy we both liked. He's a tweener. He can run all over that line. Jeremiah Ledbetter, I mean, he has potential to make an impact as a backup defensive tackle, coming in situations. Yeah, go figure. So, I mean, Kerm, with all these additions through the draft and all the excitement running through Detroit right now, what do you think the Lions, what do you expect out of Matthew Stafford and these Lions this year?
Possibly one of his better seasons, but they still see them placing second, maybe even third. I think when we did the preseason look at them earlier on Chris's show, I had them third. I'm still going to stick with that.
Yeah, I have them in third behind the Vikings, with Green Bay winning that division as well. So and the reason I have that, I think Ziggy Ansah may miss some time this year. He went from 14.5 sacks in 2015 to only 2 sacks last year. He's already on the PUP list this year to enter a contract year. And they didn't get a defensive end at 43 left end after losing Devin Taylor to the Giants, I believe it was. So they lost Devin Taylor. They didn't replace him in the draft. And now you don't have Ansah either. So they're not going to be able to get any pressure on the quarterback, which is why it's paramount for Stafford to make good decisions, because they don't have Taylor Decker, their left tackle, either. They don't have a starting defensive end that can get pressure on the quarterback. That makes them suspect to a degree, and that's why I think they won't return to the playoffs. But once they fix that and once they figure out what players they want to get rid of next offseason, they could be back depending on what they do, what additions or what moves they make, or what they lose in free agency. It's going to be interesting to see what happens with the Lions, because I touched a little bit on them in yesterday's podcast. I talked about how guys like Stafford, Ansah, Tahir Whitehead, Glover Quinn, Plodiana, they're all in contract years, and there's no way they're going to have the money to bring all of those guys back. But I think the one guy on their defensive line who's due for a breakout year is Sean Robinson, the second-year defensive tackle out of Alabama that we both raved about in last year's draft a few years ago, 2016.
Yeah, and we'll talk about the Vikings in a later show, but because I do have something to say about that after watching their game last night. But, we're now with the Lions, we didn't have a lot to talk about with the Lions. But one thing I want to hit on, which has been a little bit of a hitch for them out of all the excitement, is what about their running back? Amir Abdullah is still down, and that's pretty much. He was averaging 5.6 yards a carry in the preseason before he went down. Dwayne Washington is currently starting with Matt Asiata back there as the number 3 guy.
Yeah, the Lions
Chris?
needed a running back in the offseason, but they ignored that need because they had 4 running backs under contract. So from a business standpoint, it didn't make sense for them to spend any more money on another running back. But looking at how Abdullah's been injured for the 3rd year in a row and how they're unstable at running back, Theo Riddick might be dealing with some injuries as well. They're probably going to look at running back this year, this offseason.
Yeah, or there's always the possibility for a trade. We know there's some teams who are going to have at least one running back that they need to that at least one running back they're going to need to trade or cut. So there's that possibility there as well. But now with the moving on from the Lions, we're going to hit a team that I think everybody's got a lot to say about, and that is the Houston Texans. Now, this is one of those situations. They made the playoffs last year. They have a quarterback, but at this point, the Texans are hesitant to say that they want to start Deshaun Watson. They have a running back in Deontay Foreman, who they picked up in the draft, and I haven't seen a lot out of him. So we haven't seen a lot out of that situation, and the only 2 players, there are 3 players I'm seeing that might make any type of impact for him this year, and that's Watson, Zach Cunningham, the 2nd-round linebacker, and maybe Carlos Watkins, the defensive tackle. I'm not seeing. I haven't heard anything else out of any more of the rookies that they've drafted. And they didn't really do much in free agency.
Yeah, they did.
So, yeah, what, Chris, is their
I was going to
what is there left?
Tom Savage is going to be the week 1 starter. From what I've heard, he went 7 for 8 against the Patriots. Watson went 3 for 10. Savage is running away with the job right now. And head coach Bill O'Brien, they fired an offensive coordinator / quarterbacks coach last year. So basically, Bill O'Brien's doing all the hands-on work with the quarterbacks this year. They did move their receivers coach to quarterbacks coach, and they did disorganize some things. So I'm sort of curious to see what happens there. Deonta Foreman, who he did get arrested off the field for a marijuana incident earlier in training camp, and he was one of the rookies that the Texans took in the 3rd round out of Texas. So, that's why their Alfred Blue is ahead of Foreman on the depth chart, because they don't trust his decision making. We talked about Will Fuller breaking his collarbone on the podcast. So now you've got Braxton Miller and Jalen Strong competing for that job across from DeAndre Hopkins. And Derek Newton's on injured reserve again. Duane Brown has not been practicing at left tackle. They don't want to rush Davenport into the lineup out of Bucknell. So there's a lot of questions going on with this Houston Texans offensive line. And they don't have any picks in the first 2 rounds until 2019. They made a huge investment in Watson. So this is going to be interesting to see what happens. The one player on the offensive line that I think is going to step up for Houston this year, Su'a-Filo and Allen have both been terrible at guard this year. So I think the one player who could step up is Nick Martin, the center out of Notre Dame they drafted a few years ago in 2016. He missed all of last season with a season-ending injury, but Nick Martin is completely healthy this year. And with the offensive tackles both injured, with the guards regressing, it's really going to come down to how Nick Martin plays under center with these quarterbacks. That's going to be a huge component. And one thing that puzzles me with the Texans is they hired Wes Welker as an offensive assistant, but why didn't they make him a wide receivers coach? They just moved their tight ends coach to receivers coach. They could have just made Welker the receivers coach. He would have been a great person to mentor these receivers.
Chris, probably what was happening, they want to make him advisor first to see how he goes into the role of coach, see if he can handle coaching. They didn't want to just do it his first job as a coach. Make him an assistant first, see how he progresses as an off-the-field guy, because some of the best players who play the game are terrible coaches.
Yeah, it's like, look no further than Magic Johnson for that. When he first bought into the Lakers, as an example, they fired their coach mid-season. Magic, who was one of the teams, he was new to the executive stuff, said, okay, Bus, said, okay, Magic, you're new to it, I know, but we don't have time for a coaching search. We're in the middle. I don't want these assistants. These assistants are all going to be gone by the end of the year. You're the man. Finish out the season. He is one of the worst coaches. He even admitted he was one of the worst coaches you could ever have. He said, I should not have been a coach. I expected my guys to put in the same time, the same effort, and the same dedication that I did. And they couldn't live up to what, because I expect the same out of them as I did myself. And not everybody's capable of putting that in. And that is the thing you had to realize. So when you're bringing in somebody who is the best or one of the best, they're going to expect you to do exactly what they did. And that doesn't always go to plan. And at least some people, like Magic Johnson said, I shouldn't have been in that situation. Now, if you want to go back to it and do the exact opposite, Larry Bird was the exact opposite. He was very self-aware and knew these guys can't give what I gave. I was a bit of an anomaly. And he was one of the best coaches there was probably for over a decade, and he only coached 3 years. So, I mean, we're looking at potentially getting Wes Welker. He could be on either side of that spectrum, or he could be somewhere in the middle, but we don't know. It's easier, like Kerm said, to ease him into the situation.
Yeah.
And Chris, I'm going to say, because you pretty much went over all the offense, so we're just going to give you the rest of Houston.
Another thing, saying somebody could be a sucky player, but it's an awesome coach. Case in point, they look at Nick
Phil Jackson. He was terrible with the Knicks as a player, but he was one of the best NBA coaches.
Yeah, two examples. One is a Nick Saban. Wasn't that a great at Kent State? One of the greatest college football coaches of all time. And second one is a Bobby Cox.
Yeah,
he was only a
player.
He was a minor league catcher. Petered out in the minor leagues.
Yeah,
he's like in the top 5 of wins of all time in managers.
Yeah, and another one I'll give you that, Jesse Palmer, Carson Palmer's little brother. He could barely get a job in the NFL, basically followed his brother around as a backup. And then it's like he stopped, and now he's one of the best quarterback coaches. It's like everybody sends their quarterbacks to him. Every school around the country sends their quarterback to him. Pro coaches go to him. Pro quarterbacks go to him. You see guys who are starters in the NFL go to him to correct their mechanics. So, I mean, so it can happen. I mean, Welker could end up, yeah.
And a lot of that, which I've read and is totally true, is the fact that the greats, they don't have to work at their craft. So they don't know what it takes you have to put into it to get that good. Where the guys who are never all that good or serviceable, they know the work that has to be put in and can better teach it.
Well, sometimes it's natural like that. Like LeBron James, he doesn't really have to put the work in. Everything he is natural talent. I mean, he's just physically imposing man-child. I mean, he's not great at anything except for imposing his will on people, which is naturally gifted. Then you have guys like Bird, who I'll bring him up again, who had no natural athletic ability. He was just this hard-working hick from French Lick, Indiana that stayed out shooting basketball for 12 hours a day and himself in bodily harm. It was just a tough, gritty guy who didn't take crap from anybody. And, so, I mean, you're going to have two kinds of players. You got, like you said, the guys who have the natural talent that they were born with, physical athletic ability. And then you're going to have guys like Larry Bird and Wes Welker and those guys who, they had to work their tails off to get to where they were. And, so, I mean, if you don't want to hire guys to coach with a lot of, at least for me, natural talent, because like you said, they don't know what it takes to get there because they think they're working hard and really, they're really not. Where these guys like Welker, like, hey, I was drafted in like the 6th round, barely made a squad, and worked my tail off to get to where I was. It's like, I want guys like that as my coaches. I want guys like that as my players. So we're going to give it to Welker. I think he'll be a good coach, but that's going to remain to be seen. Chris, can you take it with the defense for the Texans real quick?
Well, the Texans have Watt back. They've got Clowney. I'm not sure if Clowney's going to be playing outside linebacker or defensive end. That's a question mark. They've got Cushing and McKinley in the middle. They don't have as much cornerback depth as they had last year, but Kareem Jackson, they have plugged him in over at safety on a few plays because their safety situation with they lost Demps. So KJ Dillon and Andre Hall are the starting safeties, so that's a suspect area. So this team is suspect at offensive tackle. They're suspect at safety. They don't have depth at corner if injuries occur. So this team is a little bit more suspect, but they're still the best defense in the AFC South when healthy. So really going to be interested to see what happens with the Texans this year. I have them at 8-8, finishing 3rd in the division behind the Colts and the Titans. But this defense is capable of winning 8 games alone itself. So we'll see what happens with the quarterbacks, the offensive line play. I would probably try to keep Watson on the bench for the first 2 years no matter what, because if you put Watson in with this offensive line, it could be David Carr all over again, and you don't want that. So I would just have him try to learn as much of the playbook as he can until Savage goes down.
Yeah, I agree for that. We're going to move on, and we're going to go to Tampa Bay. Tampa Bay has had a rough preseason, and last week it got rougher because that Browns defense has been tenacious since all preseason, and they laid the wood to Tampa Bay. They were hounding Jameis Winston, and it was add the rain and the weather, which we talked about with Kaiser earlier, and it was a very tough game for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers offense. Now, the thing was, Tampa drove. Tampa made some plays. Tampa had the wood laid to them. The Browns forced some bad passes from Winston. It was a tough day for them, but there's still hope because Winston has thrown. I mean, he's got an arm. He's got to cut down his turnovers this year, but Winston is a star. Winston's a star. And now you've got a guy who's probably going to make the most impact of any rookie this year. They drafted number 19, O.J. Howard. They got a guy I really liked in Chris Godwin at wide receiver last year. In fact,
they also got Justin in the second round before they took Godwin.
Yeah, they got Justin Evans at safety. But it was one of those situations. I was listening on the radio. We were cleaning the back room, and I heard Chris Godwin has entered the game, and I was like, crap. Because I know Chris Godwin is one of those guys, you're going to ignore him. He's not going to do anything. Then he's going to catch some insane pass, and he's going to make you look stupid.
Yep.
So that is going to be a heck of a – those two guys are going to be a heck of an addition to that offense. So, Chris, what do you think about Tampa Bay's offense and what O.J. Howard and Chris Godwin will mean to that?
I think I mentioned this on my podcast a while ago when we did the NFC South team. Jameis Winston has been limited to a 2 wide receiver set his first 2 years. They're going to give him more packages to work with and more formations to work with. 3 receiver sets, 4 receiver sets, 1 tight end set, 2 tight end sets. They're going to give him more to work with because you've got the depth at receiver to do that now because Mike Evans, Deshaun Jackson are the top 2 receiving targets on this depth chart in 2 receiver sets. In 3 receiver sets, you can either put Humphreys in the slot next to Jackson and Evans on the outside, or you can take Godwin, who's pushing Humphreys for that number 3 receiver role. You can move him on the outside next to Mike Evans and put Jackson in the slot, and defenses won't know whether they're covering Godwin or Jackson on the outside, and that's going to allow Tampa Bay to go under the radar because Cameron Brate's their number 1 tight end. Howard's the number 2 tight end, but Howard is easily capable of surpassing Brate as the number 1 tight end on this roster within a year or 2. So that lethalness, that variety, that's going to allow Tampa Bay to sneak in under the radar because most defenses, they're just going to focus on game planning around Winston and Mike Evans. They're not going to focus around game planning around these other guys, and that's going to allow those guys to go under the radar until they figure out who they need to game plan around next. And I think that's one of the things that's made the Patriots so successful for years is because people game planned around Gronkowski. They didn't necessarily game plan around Edelman until the end of last year, and that allowed Chris Hogan to go under the radar. That allowed other players on that Patriots team, like Bennett, to go under the radar last year. And now the Buccaneers are in the same position where they have a multitude of receivers, and those guys are going to go under the radar because they're just going to focus on Winston and Evans. Maybe Deshaun Jackson, they'll focus on him too, but they won't focus as much on Adam Humphreys or Chris Godwin. And Godwin got by Vernon Hargreaves in training camp. Like, he torched Hargreaves in training camp. So he should be starting, in my opinion. So that's why I think with these formations, you're going to see more 4 receiver sets, more 2 running back sets, more 2 tight end sets, more of what Brady gets to work with. Because Winston's got the 5 football IQ to digest all that, but they haven't had the supporting cast to give Winston the luxury to call all those plays, all those packages. Now they do, and I think that makes Tampa Bay really dangerous offensively.
Yeah, and Kerm, I've got to ask you, Cameron Brate is one of my favorite pass-catching tight ends in the NFL. Cameron Brate is 6'5", 245 pounds. O.J. Howard, your man, is 6. Okay, 6'6", 260. 260, 245, 6'5", 6'6". 26 years old for Brait. It's like, do you think that this tight end combination can be a Gronkowski Hernandez-esque tight end formation in Tampa minus the murders?
Yeah, that's what I was going to be success. Right before you said it, that was my thinking. It could be a Gronk Hernandez type of combination.
That's exactly what I was thinking as well.
That's going to be interesting and possibly lethal.
Yeah, that's why I said there's lethal, because they can run 2 tight end sets. It's probably gonna be like that. That's probably the most ideal comp, or Brock Bennett, if you want to count last year what Bennett did.
Yeah, and that is, these guys are, because I think, you've got the big receivers on the end. You got Jackson, you got Evans. I think that you've got to look more at Brait and Howard, because those guys, Brait had 56 receptions for 660 yards last year, and these weren't small receptions. He was averaging 11 yards per reception and had 8 touchdowns. You add Howard to that, plus you get Evans on the outside, and Jackson's the veteran. I mean, that's going to be deadly. And look at the height of these guys. Every single one of them's like 6'4" or taller. That is a matchup nightmare. Jameis Winston, when everybody gets healthy and on the field, Jameis Winston is going to be the happiest man on the planet to have to throw to those guys.
Yeah, he's going to be smiling like Bobby Boucher at the end of The Waterboy when he threw that pass. That was a touchdown.
Yeah, it is going to be one of those instances that it's going to be something to watch. It's something that I'm looking at, that, and these guys aren't stupid either. They went to places like Alabama. Texas Tech is a huge, believe it or not, despite what Johnny Manziel did to their reputation, are a big academic school. Brait went to Harvard. Alabama, known well for academics, especially with Nick Saban. Nick Saban does not take stupid people. He will kick you out for grades faster than anybody. So, I mean, these are not only great athletes, big guys, strong guys, but these are smart guys. And I think we all know about Jameis Winston's, who's 4.0, GPA, and everybody's like, oh, he's lazy, he's not taking things seriously. And it's like, no, he just doesn't have to put that much effort into his studies. He's just that damn smart. So, I mean, they have put together probably one of the most intelligent teams in the NFL offensively. So you cannot say anything right now that would make those skill positions look bad. They are just one of the best skill position teams in the NFL right now. And
it's going to come down to how Mike Smith manages the defense as a defensive coordinator, because the offense is there. Offense is ready to make a stand. It's just going to come down to how he mediates this defense, because they do have Gerald McCoy. They've got Levante David, Quan Alexander. Grimes is in a contract year. Hargrave struggled in training camp, but he could take that. He might take that next step this year. So there's a lot of interesting things to look for on this Tampa Bay defense. I still think this team can get home field in the NFC, but I don't think they're going to be a team that wins a playoff game. They're not there yet, but they're going to be. That's my outlook for Tampa Bay. What's the final team we have?
Well, you actually took the words out of my mouth when it came to the Tampa Bay defense, but something you missed there, Chris. was on that defense is that they have Noah Spence right in the wings, and they've got a tough interior pass rush. They've got a tough exterior pass rush. And it was shown against the Browns. And as you said, Hargrave struggled, but he got an interception against Kaiser in this last game. So, I mean, I think Hargraves just had a slow preseason, but he's starting to work his way up. He had a good game against the Browns, so we'll see in week 4 if that continues or not. The last team we've got for today, the Tennessee Titans. Now, the Titans are a team I've had mixed feelings about for a couple years. I'm not the biggest fan of Marcus Mariota, but I do respect what Marcus Mariota is doing at the moment. And he has had a great couple years. In the preseason, he's doing well. He's averaging 8 yards per attempt. He's had 32 attempts. He's 20 for 32. He's got no interceptions, 2 touchdowns. He's being efficient. And got a new little toy to play with there in Tennessee in Corey Davis. And
he has a bunch of new toys to play with because Rashard Matthews is the #1 guy at the moment still, but they brought in Eric Decker from the Jets and Corey Davis, who they drafted at 5. Plus, they got Taywan Taylor in the 3rd round out of Western Kentucky. So Mariota has a bunch of new toys to play with.
Yeah, but Davis is kind of the shiniest at this point. I mean, you got to take shiny into account.
Yeah, Davis is the Oscar, and the other 2 toys are just like crayons or some crap in a McDonald's Happy Meal. Screw it.
Well, if you're going to call him Oscar, it's like, are you talking about Oscar that plays around in garbage cans on Sesame Street?
No, I'm talking about Oscar, the Oscars, like the Oscar Awards, like the Grammys.
Okay. That sounds better than Oscar on Sesame Street.
Hollywood Award you want to think of. He's that.
Yeah. Yeah, but as you said, Taywan Taylor, 8 receptions so far in the preseason, 145 yards, 18 yards of reception. So he's not doing too shabby himself. And so then they've got Derrick Henry. Henry's not playing too well right now. 89 yards on 33 attempts. But, they got DeMarco Murray. He's not playing too well. 6 attempts, 16 yards. I don't expect those guys to continue to not play well. So
I don't either.
Yeah. So Kerm, we know about Chris and myself just touched a little bit on the receivers. We'll probably touch on them again before the end of the broadcast. But what do you think about these running backs, since you have pretty intimate knowledge of both Henry and Murray?
Probably is a case of they getting the kinks worked out in the preseason. I don't see it lasting much past week 2. If there's any, I would start getting concerned if it continues past week 2. Then I would start getting concerned. It might be case taking them a little bit longer to get back into the fold, or that line might be messed up a little bit.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see what happens. The offensive tackle situation, you have Taylor Lewan back at left tackle and Jack Conklin back at right tackle. Conklin and Lewan did well for Mariota in his first year. And they did lose some interior offensive linemen. They lost Chance Warmack to the Philadelphia Eagles, and their center situation is still questionable. I think the interior offensive line is the biggest question mark right now with the Titans, but I think they still have an excellent offensive tackle situation, as well as 2 pass rushers with double-digit sacks on the defensive side of the ball, and Brian Arakpo and Derek Morgan, who both had double-digit sacks last year. That's what has to give you optimism about this team possibly winning the AFC South or getting a wild card at the very worst, Joe,
Yeah, and I think that they have a chance to get into the wild card. I don't think they do, but they have a very good opportunity. I think their defense still needs a little bit of work, but they've got a lot of promise on that side. I think their offensive line still needs a little work, but they got a lot of promise there. They've got promise at the running back situation. So, I mean, right now, Tennessee is running on potential, what they could be. And I'm looking to wait for them to turn that potential into something better, something more. So far, they haven't done it. But there's a good opportunity that they might. So with the Titans, I mean, there's a chance for it, which now leads me to ask you guys the question, team by team. Chris, we're going to start with you. What is your outlook for the Denver Broncos?
Outlook for the Denver Broncos, I have them at 6-10. I have them at 7-9, finishing third in the AFC West. I had them at 6-10 initially, but with the Chargers injuries to Mike Williams and Forrest Lamp and Denzel Perryman, that loss I had them losing to in week 1 becomes a win for Denver. So Denver, I have them at 7-9, but if they can beat the Cowboys without Ezekiel Elliott, they would be 8-8. And I do have Denver sweeping the Raiders. So if they did beat the Cowboys, or if they did beat a team that we expect them to lose to, and them and the Raiders finish with the same record, we would have Denver winning the tiebreaker over Oakland for that final wild card spot. So that's something to keep an eye on.
Yeah, and Kerm, what is your outlook for the Denver Broncos?
I think I'm going to go a 9-7 season, missing the playoffs.
And back at it, Kerm, what's your draft outlook for the Detroit Lions?
Again, I'm going to go 8-8, finishing third in the division.
Chris?
Prepare to cover Lions bags over your head again, Detroit. I have you guys going 5-11, finishing third in the NFC North division. So you can go ahead and get those 0-16 paper bags out again. I'm sorry, but it's just I don't think the Lions are going to be very good this year. I just have a gut feeling they're going to be worse, and they're going to be the letdown team, because there's always the letdown team, the team that makes the playoffs, and then they end up back in the bottom 5. And I think the Lions are this year's letdown team.
Bold prediction by Chris Ransom here today, folks. Yeah, Chris, how are you going to top that? What are you going to do with the outlook for the Houston Texans?
I'm probably going to bore our Texans fans and tell them they're due for an 8-8 season in third place in the AFC South. I have the Colts winning 12 games because they have such an easy schedule to begin the year. Even if Andrew Luck and Ryan Kelly miss the first 6 to 8 weeks, they still have such an easy schedule. I have the Titans at 10-6. Spoiler. We'll get to the Titans in a little bit. I'll explain that. But I have the Texans at 8-8, missing the playoffs, and I think it's because of their quarterback situation. I think there's so much uncertainty on the offensive side of the ball that I have them at 8-8, but that defense is good enough to get them at least 8 wins.
And Kerm, after all the boldness that Chris is putting us through here right now, what do you have with Houston?
Same as Chris.
Yeah, well, Chris is not quite as bold now. Kerm agrees with you. I'm sorry. So, Kerm, you got a lot of people you seem to like on. What's your outlook for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers?
I have them going a 10-6 and finishing second in the division behind the Falcons.
Time to bring some boldness back. I have Tampa Bay as the only NFC team winning 12 regular season games. That gives them home field. I have them sweeping the Panthers and sweeping the Saints. So I have the Buccaneers going 12-4, getting home field, but then losing to Kerm's team, the Dallas Cowboys, who get in as a 6th seed, beat the Packers in the wild card game in Green Bay, and then they go to Tampa Bay and beat the Buccaneers. And Tampa Bay, it's a learning experience for them, just like it was a learning experience for Dallas last year. So Tampa Bay, they go 12-4, they get home field, but they lose in the divisional round, and it's a learning experience for them.
At least they get to the playoffs. Yeah, and
Tampa Bay's never had home field in their entire team history. The year they won Super Bowl 37, Philadelphia had home field. Just wanted to throw that out there.
So did we put Chris up with a will of punishment for that bet, for that a boost?
maybe we'll keep that in mind.
I'm not running for president, if that's what you're thinking, Kerm. That I'm not old enough yet. And besides, an election where I went up against Donald Trump would be an absolute disaster. Nobody would win.
No, I was saying you should have to do a will of punishment if you're wrong.
What should I have to do if I'm wrong?
Will of a punishment.
Will of punishment, or what kind of punishment?
I don't know.
Yeah, and
do I have to wear an eye patch during one of the podcasts on my YouTube channel if the Buccaneers don't make the playoffs? Do I have to wear an eye patch for one episode? Is that a fair punishment?
well, nobody would know either way, so it really doesn't matter. Chris, what is your outlook? The Tennessee Titans.
I think I leaked it when I broke down the Texans, but I have them at 10-6. I have them getting a wild card game, and I have them losing to the Chiefs in Kansas City in the wild card game. But they could end up winning that game. They could end up getting to the divisional round. They could end up proving me wrong. My bold prediction with the Titans is I have them going to Pittsburgh and beating the Steelers in Pittsburgh when they face the Steelers on Thursday Night Football, because that game is on the 11th, and the 11th, that game is in Week 11. And remember, the Penguins beat the Predators on June 11th, so it's going to be broadcast on NBC, same network that the Stanley Cup was broadcast on. So I feel like there might be a connection or a crazy conspiracy theorist correlation there. So I'm going to say the Titans beat the Steelers in Pittsburgh, and they get the wild card at 10-6, but they lose to Kansas City in the wild card game.
Yeah, and Kerm, what do you say about the outlook for the Tennessee Titans?
I'm going with 10-6, and with them winning the division at 10-6.
Yeah. And that is your draft outlook for today, folks. We'll probably be back around the same time, about noon Eastern, with another 5 teams. And before we go, I just want to give a quick update injury-wise that's going on right now with the Chicago Bears. Chicago won their first. It was just
Cameron Meredith, he tore his ACL. He's out for the season, and he's a restricted free agent after this year.
and it is speculated that he may have also torn his MCL along with his ACL. That is definitely going to hurt, not only for this year, but beyond for the Bears, because he's looking to miss not only this year, but part of next year as well. And so, folks, for myself, Andrew Kermish, Chris Ransom, this has been Draft Outlook. So for all of you, have fun, and as always, take care.